I've stood up to Trump.
Like and subscribe.
Questions orales, oral questions. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition, de la chef de l'Opposition.
Canadians in the former Liberal strongholds of Toronto and Montreal have now given their verdict. After 9 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Taxes up, costs up, crimes up, time's up. Mr. Speaker, isn't it time for Canadians to have a chance to render their verdict right across the country, electing a common-sense Conservative government that will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime?
I ask members, especially members on the far side of the House, to please not to take the microphone until they're recognized by the Speaker. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I am so glad to have the chance to talk about the economy. That is because today we had good news for Canadians. Inflation is back down to where it was before COVID hit. Inflation has been within the Bank of Canada's target range this whole year. Wages have outpaced inflation for 19 months in a row. But the Conservatives don't want to talk about it. They are so weak and spiteful that for them, good news for Canadians is bad news they want to ignore.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, this incompetent finance minister would tell you that you should celebrate that after prices rising faster than at any time in 40 years, they continue to rise, just not as quickly. I'm sure the people living in tent encampments, or the record-smashing 2 million people lined up at food banks, or the 1 in 4 kids going to school hungry after 9 years of this government will be celebrating. But what we now find out is that it's worse than we thought. According to a document just released, the government's second carbon tax will cost $9 billion in lost GDP. Why won't we have a carbon tax election to decide?
The Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I think we all know why the Conservatives are so panicked about an election. It's because they can see that the economic news is good. They can see that we are now back to exactly where we were before COVID hit. They can see the Bank of Canada has lowered interest rates 3 times in a row, and wages have been ahead of inflation for 19 months. That's good news for Canadians. It's bad news for Conservatives.
And once again, I apologize. Normally, I would indicate out of respect to all members by saying the Honourable, and I forgot to do that in this case. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The bad news is we now have 1,800 homeless encampments in Ontario. Shame. 35 in Halifax alone. 2 million Canadians lined up at food banks after 9 years of NDP Liberal government. And now that we learn that on top of the $25 billion annual hit of the first carbon tax to our GDP, the second carbon tax will subtract another $9 billion a year, over $35 billion in lost GDP. That's almost $2,000 per family. Why won't this costly NDP Liberal government allow Canadians to vote on the carbon tax?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I am so glad to have the chance to talk about housing because there is more good news Canadians should know about. And that is that we have extended to 30 years amortizations for all first-time home buyers. That means more young Canadians can buy that first home and afford that mortgage. We've extended to 30 years amortizations for all new homes. That's to encourage what we know we all need, more homes built faster. But these weak and spiteful Conservatives cannot celebrate good news for Canadians because it's bad news for their partisan interests.
Yes. The Liberals have let people down again and again, and they are done. It's clear from the results of the election last night. The Liberals are done. Maybe it's because they keep on teaming up with the Conservatives to let greedy CEOs continue to rip off Canadians. In fact, inflation numbers show that grocery greed has driven up the food prices more than 21% in the past 3 years. Why did the Liberals team up with the Conservatives to protect greedy CEOs from a price cap on food essentials?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I hope the NDP and indeed all members of this House will set partisanship aside for one moment to congratulate Canadians at the light at the end of the tunnel, at the fact that after an extremely challenging time with COVID and its economic aftermath, inflation is back to where it was before COVID first hit. When it comes to taxes, we believe that those who have the most capacity should pay their fair share, and we've acted on that.
Then I have
the honourable member for Burnaby South.
Liberals have continued to team up with the Conservatives to let grocery greed drive up the price of food, and that's got to stop.
Prime Minister.
I don't think anybody listening to Question Period today, or frankly any day, imagines that the Liberals are teaming up with the Conservatives. Or that we agree with them about very much at all. They are the party of privilege and austerity. We are the party of people. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, we have asked those at the very top to pay their fair share so that we can support Canada and Canadians.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
It's day 2 in the House as the first female finance minister, again, is being publicly humiliated by the fake feminist prime minister. What's worse is that she's being replaced by an unelected man outside of her own caucus who her boss is now shielding from conflict of interest laws that allow him to take her job and keep his money. A man who works against our resource sector, who exports jobs to China while championing higher carbon taxes on heating and eating for Canadians. Why won't the finance minister talk to her boss about ending the personal attacks on her own credibility?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
You know, Mr. Speaker, I am so glad to have the chance to talk about feminism, because I know what a feminist government looks like. A feminist government builds the first national system of early learning and childcare in this country. A feminist government makes contraceptives free, and a feminist government ensures that every single woman in Canada has full control over her body. Until the Conservatives stand up for that, they have no right to talk about it.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
Fake feminist prime minister throws his finance minister under the bus with all the other ministers. The real record of this finance minister is record smashing 1 million people visiting a food bank in her province. In Ontario, 1 in 4 Canadians living in poverty. Canadians now spend more in taxes than they do on housing, on food, and on clothes combined. No wonder they're putting the training wheels back on for her. She can tell that to the Prime Minister.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I've stood up to Trump, and I have stood up to Putin. Juvenile, playground insults from the wannabe, MAGA, maple syrup conservatives do not frighten me at all. But what I think is really interesting is that they don't actually want to talk about the economy. And that's because good economic news for Canadians is bad news for them. How pathetic that they put their own partisan interest first.
The Honourable Member from Haldimand Norfolk.
After 9 years of this Liberal NDP government, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and now time is up. This self-proclaimed feminist Prime Minister has repeatedly shoved aside strong women who have stood up to him. Now the Prime Minister is replacing the first ever female finance minister with an unelected Mark Carbon Tax Carney. Why is this finance minister allowing herself to be publicly humiliated in this manner?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it is a bit rich to hear the member of the Conservative Party pretend to care about feminism when their own leader was using misogynistic hashtags on their videos to attract men who hate women. Mr. Speaker, it was anything but feminist when they bring forward backdoor legislation to ban abortion and to take away women's right to choose their own rights, Mr. Speaker, or when they all voted against increased funding to combat gender-based violence or to support survivors. Mr. Speaker, their leader doesn't care about women or equality. He only cares about himself.
The Honourable Member from Haldeman Norfolk.
Mr. Speaker, it's so sad. They're not even allowing the finance minister to answer because they all...
Order! Order! The Honourable Member from Haldeman Norfolk, from the top, please.
From the top? Mr. Speaker, they're not even allowing the finance minister to answer her own questions because they all know that the carbon tax is a failure. Canadians are suffering. There are over 1,800 homeless encampments in Ontario alone. 26% of Canadians are saying that they are considering leaving the country because it is too expensive. A single mother in Kingston reported paying 100% of her income in rent. Will this finance minister admit that the Prime Minister has lost confidence in her and Canadians have lost confidence in this government?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives keep talking about women, but they don't support policies that support women. Right. Why are they against affordable childcare? If they care about that single mother, they should be supporting affordable childcare. Mr. Speaker, if they care about women's economic freedom, they should be supporting childcare. If they care about women's rights, they should be supporting a woman's right to choose. The real fake feminists, Mr. Speaker, are the people who sit on that side of the aisle.
Right.
The Honourable Member from Leeds Grenville, Thousand Island and Rideau Lakes.
Well, Speaker, after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up. This Prime Minister's new de facto finance minister, Carbon Tax Carney, has massive conflicts of interest, including multiple foreign investment firms. Canadians don't know how much he personally stands to profit from the advice that he's giving to the Prime Minister. It's more blatant corruption from this NDP Liberal government. So will the Prime Minister simply have Carbon Tax Carney sworn in as a public office holder so that the full extent of Canada's disclosure laws apply to him too?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, unlike the Conservatives, we do believe in listening to experts from across the country. But let's talk about where the Conservatives get their ideas. The Conservative leader gets his advice on helping Canadians with their grocery bills from a Loblaws lobbyist. He gets his advice on Ukraine from Elon Musk and from Tucker Carlson. And he has courted the support of misogynists and cozied up to the far right. Those are the advisors Canadians should be really concerned about.
The Honourable Member from Regina Capel has stood in this place and understands the importance of calling members to order so that those who do have the floor have the opportunity to address the House. The Honourable Member from Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
It's absolutely absurd to hear the finance minister give anyone lessons about who they're taking advice from. Arch-liberal elitist Mark Carney. This guy has more conflicts than the twice guilty and convicted Prime Minister of their party. And they're letting carbon tax Carney keep all the money and all the power by covering up his massive conflicts of interest while giving away that finance minister's job. He makes millions from foreign investment firms, and now he's advising the Prime Minister. So why is the Prime Minister letting carbon tax Carney keep the money and the power and serving as the real finance minister?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, it's absolutely shameful what the Conservatives are doing. When there is a Canadian who doesn't agree with their vision for Canada, what do? Attack them. Whether it's anybody who doesn't agree with what the Conservatives do, the only thing they know how to do is denigrate that person. Mr. Speaker, we should be able to disagree without being disagreeable. We should be able to hear advice from a whole wide range of actors without attacking their character and bringing down fellow Canadians. They should be ashamed of their actions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.